Hello and welcome back to the channel. For this video I want to try something a little different, which is discuss the 3-action economy in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And now the 3-action economy is widely lauded as one of the greatest pieces of design in PF2. I would tend to agree. I think it's, of all the similar TTRPGs that I've played, PF2 far and away has the simplest action economy, but that still allows it to have a great deal of complexity and depth for both players and GMs to explore, which is why it's probably my favorite iteration of action economy in these kinds of games. So what is the action economy of PF2? Well, put very simply, you get 3 actions at the start of your turn, which you can spend however you so desire, and then once you spend those 3 actions, your turn ends. You also get 1 reaction, which can be spent at any point outside of your turn to do things that require reaction, and there are things that are free actions that are so trivial to do that they don't cost any action at all. So that was relatively simple to explain and grasp, and you can see that, for example, attacking is an action, moving is an action. There are some activities like casting spells are usually 2 actions, and so on and so forth. But because everything is listed on this base set of actions, where there is no differentiation between actions, you just have 3 actions that you can spend as you wish, actually understanding and being able to use the PF2 action economy is very simple. But I think to really appreciate how simple this new action economy is, I think it's good to compare it to a couple other systems. So let's start with Pathfinder 2nd Edition's predecessor, Pathfinder 1st Edition. So, the Pathfinder 1st Edition action economy has 6 different types of actions: a standard action, move action, full round action, swift actions, immediate actions, and free actions. At the start of every round, you get a standard action and a move action. And then, if you want, you can combine those into a full round action. And then, swift, immediate, and free actions are all 3 different ways of saying this thing doesn't quite cost an action, but in slightly different ways. And there's various rules on when exactly you can use each one and how often you can use each one. And this technically isn't even all of it. There's also the 5-foot step and the attack of opportunity, which don't fall under any of these specific sexual actions, but are still things you can do on your turn. And even from this brief overview, I think you can understand how keeping in mind all these different types of actions and trying to figure out what costs what and can you sacrifice this type of action for that type of action can be a bit of a headache to keep track of. The second system I want to compare to is D&D 5th Edition, which only has 4 different types of actions you can take. Your action, your standard action, a bonus action, a free action outside of your turn, and buried in this other activities on your turn paragraph, you'll see you have 1 free object interaction. Now, the free object interaction, I've never seen anyone really enforce that, but it is technically part of the rules that you can only interact with 1 thing for free every round, and future interactions should take one of the other 3 resources. Now, 5e is widely lauded as a pretty simple system, very easy for new people to jump into, and while its action economy is pretty easy to learn on the whole, especially in comparison to PF1, I still believe Pathfinder 2nd Edition has it beat. Because at the end of the day, you're still juggling 4 different things, each with their own rules and how ways they can be used, and you need to explain to a player that you only get 1 action, but you also get a bonus action, but the bonus action isn't actually a second action, it's something different, it's a um, different kind of resource that you can't use for the same things that you would in your normal action, can be a little fiddly, especially when you're already trying to grasp all of the different things that 5th edition asks you to do in combat. So why do I think the PF2 action economy is superior to PF1 and 5e? Well, it comes down to broadly the 2 things you want from an action economy, which is 1, you want to be able to improvise when a player does something that's not necessarily spelled out in the rules or they haven't prepared for, and 2, you want the action economy to be interesting to use. You want to have interesting decisions when you're in combat, so you aren't just doing the same thing over and over again, because that can pretty easily lead to stale combats. So let's start with why I think it's easy to improvise around, which is that because everything is an action, everything sort of has equal weight, which means if your player wants to do something strange, well, it's very simple to say, okay, that's going to cost an action. If they want to do something especially convoluted, you can say, okay, that's going to cost 2 actions, or maybe it's going to cost your whole round, so all 3 of your actions to try and do this thing. Once again, we can compare this to 5th edition. In 5e, your action is incredibly valuable, because your action is what is needed to attack, to cast spells, really to do anything of significance in combat. So, if your player wants to try something weird, making their attempt cost an action can be really difficult to justify because they're basically giving up their entire turn to do it. However, there isn't a lot of other options in 5th edition for when your players want to improvise in combat. You can make it cost a bonus action, but bonus actions are really meant to be kind of minor movements, and a lot of the times, characters won't really have a use for their bonus action, so making something cost a bonus action can kind of be equivalent to making it free, whereas making it cost an action can, in effect, take the character out of combat for the entire turn. There's not really a lot of in between, which makes judging this stuff on the fly be kind of difficult if you want to make a fair judgment in combat. But even more important than being able to improvise in combat is the question of how interesting to use in combat the action economy is. And the free action economy for PF2, I think, is an incredibly interesting action economy, but that's not solely due to the 3 actions. It in fact has much more to do with a different part of PF2 system, and that is the multiple attack penalty. So, the multiple attack penalty is the design answer to the question of why wouldn't I just spend all 3 of my actions wailing away on my enemies? And that's because when you take your first action to attack something, whether that's a literal attack with a weapon or something with the attack trait like grappling, you have no penalty. However, your second attack attempt takes a -5 penalty, and future attempts beyond that take a -10 penalty. What this means is that if you stand there spending all 3 actions, you're just striking your opponent 3 times, your third attack, much more often than not, is going to be wasted, because that -10 penalty is so debilitating that you're incredibly unlikely to even hit anything but the weakest of your foes. What this results in is a system where attacking 3 times is heavily disincentivized, and where spending that third action to do something that doesn't suffer from multiple attack penalty is very, very encouraged. Things like demoralizing, things like raising a shield, even things like stepping away from the enemy, so your enemy has to waste an action walking up to you before they can attack. These are all things that are not only made possible, but in fact encouraged by the 3 action economy. Of course, spellcasters are much less likely to use an action with the attack trait than a martial is, but this 3 action economy still works for spellcasters as well, due to the fact that most spells cost 2 actions to cast, which means outside of special circumstances, a spellcaster is going to be able to cast one spell and then have one floating action available that they can't use to cast another full spell that they must find something else to do with. In this way, the action economy actually forces spellcasters to do something other than just sit there and blast away for all 3 other actions, and encourages them to do something else outside of just straight casting. And the last thing I want to touch on is how PF2's action economy falls into one of my favorite design decisions of the system, which is its emphasis on wide power rather than tall power. And what I mean by that is wide power is a focus on competency in a lot of areas, whereas tall power is focusing on getting extremely good at one thing, often to the detriment of other proficiencies. Because of the multiple attack penalty, it's very, very difficult for anyone to be good at just standing there attacking 3 times in a turn. And so what this encourages is for characters to branch out and become good at a bunch of different things so that they have options in combat for when they want to do something other than attacking. Yes, a character is going to spend one or probably 2 actions attacking an enemy, but their third action should allow the character to express their power in some other way, whether that be demoralizing, whether that be some increased mobility, whether that be defending themselves, however it may be. This emphasis on wide power allows characters to be more than a one-trick pony in Pathfinder 2nd. This is in stark contrast to something like Pathfinder 1st Edition or D&D 5th, which has a much heavier focus on tall power. In 5th edition, and especially in Pathfinder 1st edition, you are entirely capable of making characters that can melt through level, quote unquote, level appropriate enemies in a single turn, or bypass any quote unquote level appropriate challenge, even on a roll of a natural 1 or natural 2. What this means is that the difference between a quote unquote optimized character and an unoptimized character in those systems is enormous, which puts the onus on the DM to balance encounters for a mixed party, which is really kind of an impossible task. When one of your characters can kill Tiamat in a round and the other can barely hit an ogre, how do you balance encounters for that party? And the answer is you really don't, much to the woes of DMs everywhere. This focus on the 3-action economy also allows the designer to smooth out the balance curve of PF2. Unlike in, for example, 5th edition, where level 5 is such an enormous boost in power due to gaining extra attack for your martial classes and 3rd level spells for your spellcasters, PF2's 3-action economy, the design focus around it, as well as a myriad of other design decisions in the system, allow the power curve to remain relatively smooth at all levels and relatively controlled at all levels, meaning that it's much easier for GM, especially at high level, to create interesting balanced encounters that reward their players for what they can do and challenge their players exactly as much as the GM intends. So that's all I wanted to say on the action economy, and normally I end these videos with kind of a recommendation for a girl to exploit what I've been discussing. That's kind of difficult to do with such a broad concept as the 3-action economy. However, if you want to kind of force yourself to exploit the action economy and see all the different things PF2 allows you to do in it, I want to recommend the monk. So the reason I want to recommend the monk, if you want to explore the 3-action economy, is because of their first level class feature, Flurry of Blows, which for one action allows you to make 2 strikes. And this ties into what I said before about the multiple attack penalty. You very rarely want to make more than 2 attacks a round with a character. So what this means is that unlike most characters who are going to spend 2 actions attacking and then 1 action left over to do what they like with, a monk can spend 1 action to Flurry of Blows and have 2 more actions in their round to explore the action economy, to take advantage of their increased movement speed, to explore different mental abilities like demoralize and recall knowledge, and so on and so forth. And while monks are very mad multi-ability score dependent, because of the plethora of ability scores that PF2 provides to you as a player, it's very reasonable for you to have at least one pretty decent mental ability score, meaning that even though monks are very much a physical martial class, you can still invest a decent amount into something like charisma for demoralizing and fainting and so on, intelligence for recalling knowledge, or wisdom for battle medicine. Because of this, monks are uniquely positioned in the PF2 system to explore basically every part of the action economy available to you as a player. So that's all for this video. It's probably going to be a little shorter than my previous 2 videos, but hopefully it was still interesting to discuss the 3-action economy. Next time I probably just want to go into a broad overview of all the different options you have, just so you know what you can invest in, and maybe I'll take some of the more interesting ones and do a deeper dive like I did with recall knowledge and see what options the system gives for us to, for example, make demoralizing as good as we can make it. So, until next time, I hope you tune in to see what I have to say, and I hope you have a lovely day.